And a very good Monday morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Joe Benigno back with you again, the Yoda Pain Podcast, Monday, the 23rd of March, 2026. Of course, we're brought to you by Manscaped, Carolina Resort Vacation, and our good friends at Anita Discount Tire. And we have with us a very tired, I would assume, the great Mike Vaccaro of the New York Post. He just got off the red eye from San Diego. After that, just unbelievable. Well, I won't say the game was so unbelievable. It's certainly an unbelievable finish yesterday as St. John's advances to the Sweet 16 with a crazy ending to knock off Kansas and get ready for what should be a unbelievable Friday night in Washington, D.C. against the Duke Blue Devils. Mike, how are you?
Joe, it's good to see you. Thank goodness I didn't take the red eye into LaGuardia because that might have been a problem.
Yeah, you
God,
would. Yeah, they
that's
closed it down
that's
because of that accident they had with the Air Canada
sometimes
plane.
sometimes you just get lucky, I guess.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Speaking of that, how was the lines with the TSA? Was that any issue there?
Well, the little trick I have leaving is that because I tootled around in a wheelchair,
All
they,
right.
they they kind of let me cut lines, which is nice. And it wasn't an issue in San Diego because there were six people online when I got on the red eye, when I got on the through security last night. So I think that's just I think that's unique because it's every city is having some problems, but I just happened to hit the airport at the right time, I guess.
Well, good. I'm glad you got back and safe
Yeah,
and sound.
what a
When you going to
game!
DC? When you
Yeah,
going
well, the
there?
game's Friday, so sometime either Thursday or Friday. I'm not quite sure yet. Obviously, I'm shilling this book left and right. So when I'm done with that, then I'll turn back to the Johnnies, which they've been a fun story all year. But man, they're really coming on to be a really special story now, which is kind of neat.
Well, we'll get to the book, and I just want to show it here right now. It's the Bosses of the Bronx. Here you go for everybody seeing it. It's a tremendous book. Some great stuff in here. Great stories with George and Billy and Reggie and all of that stuff, which is just fascinating.
Yeah,
That's one of even though I'm a Met fan, I was always fascinated by those teams, and I've always been a big fan of Reggie Jackson. So
yeah, I
we'll
know you
get to
were.
we'll get to all that as we go on. But we got to talk about St. John. I mean, unbelievable yesterday. I mean, they're in control of this game, Mike. They had a 14-point lead. Really controlled the game throughout. I mean, their defense was
Yeah,
unbelievable. Bryce Hopkins hitting threes, which really was the hidden story of this game when all was said and done. They played outstanding defense, and then out of the last 8 minutes, they're up 14 points. You're feeling pretty. I got to tell you this: watching the game, I'm feeling pretty good about it, but I was still nervous. I got to tell you, I was still nervous because even though they made, I think they were 11 for 35 from threes. I just didn't like it. And I got to tell you too, Mike, the officiating this game. Look, I don't care what anybody tells me. I'm the king of conspiracy theories. The NCAA has it in for Patino. They don't like St. John's. They don't like New York. I'm going to say all of that because some of the calls in this game, whether it was the goaltending call they didn't call for Zuby Ejiofor, whether it was the over and back they called when clearly the kid from Kansas touched the ball, and that was huge in the closing minutes of this game with Kansas coming back, or the out of bounds play where
right.
the kid that touched the ball from Kansas to put it back in play, and I think it wound up with, I don't know if it was a layup, whatever it was, you were out of bounds.
Yeah, the
And I
problem
know
with
that
the
Patino had wasted his one challenge
that's the
on what he
thing.
shouldn't have
And
challenged
and the
earlier
thing
in
of it
the game.
was he didn't challenge the goaltending call, and you can see he got really mad at his bench because once he saw it on the big screen, it was too late
Right.
to change it, and so he didn't use it then when he obviously would have won it. I think he was kind of itching to use it, and he used it in a bad spot later on when it was 50-50, and it was just a ball out of bounds early in the half. I mean, it was really a weird time to use it, but I think he was just itching to use it because he was frustrated he didn't use it the other time. And as a result of that, he didn't have it for the backcourt one, which clearly would have been
Right.
overturned. Um, there was actually even another one at the very end of the first half. Now my seats were right on the baseline there, so I mean like parallel to the baseline. So you can really see uh, you know feet that go out of bounds. And there was another one late in the first half when they just kind of rushed the ball in he was clearly on the end line, but the refs just don't look at everything, so he didn't see that. But But it was interesting to think about that later on when they clearly missed it in a really important time when they wound up getting a follow-up rebound, which is the reason why it was necessary for Dean Darling to go all Jimmy Chitwood at the end.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And how about this? So this got me ticked off. So here we are in the closing minute of the game, right? Now it's a freaking nail biter, and I'm saying, man, you can't blow this game. Now, I mean, at this point, as I'm watching the game, and we all know that's a game the St. John's had to win. We'll get to what happens later. But we all know they had to win this game last night. Otherwise, it would have been a disappointing year. Throw everything out if they don't win last night.
I agree.
Right? And as I'm watching the game, and I'm flipping out, man. They can't blow this game now. I'm sitting there, and I'm looking at the last minute. How the hell is St. John's got 10 fouls, and Kansas has 2 fouls with like 11 seconds left in the game? They got 2 fouls, and they wound up fouling 4 times, which I guess was a pretty good strategy for Self.
It was great strategy, except it's funny because I was sitting next to Pat Forty from Sports Illustrated.
Okay.
And they found the last one was a 3.9, and I felt like they could have waited another second because he wasn't going to do anything where he was. And I told him, I said, I think they might wish that they'd at least taken another 9/10 of a second off. And as it turns out, that was I'm not right about a lot, but I was right about that. Here's what I'll say about fouls. And look, there are sometimes, I guess, when you see foul disparities and it's outrageous and it reflects what you see. I mean, what I saw last night in the second half was St. John settling for a lot of threes, for one thing, not getting the ball to Zuby nearly as much as he could. Zuby going up against a guy who is taller than him, which and can, was really good on defense, which doesn't really happen a lot. So I didn't get the sense they got a bad whistle. I just thought, I think maybe they might have been a little more too generous calling on the other end. But even then, I didn't think there was anything. I thought the egregious calls were all procedural. The backcourt was a bad call. Mm-hmm. The out of bounds is a bad call. That get goaltending. I mean, it's a for New York basketball fans a lot of bad juju there because as we know, we would never have even seen Tyrese Halliburton take a shot last year in Game 1, except they didn't call properly a goaltending call against Brunson a few seconds before that. So, but yeah, I mean, look, it's. I guess at the end of the day, when you play a game like that, you better win it because if you don't, and I wrote about this in my column today, and I asked Patino the question. I mean, if you don't, you wind up seeing the shot over and over again for 34 years, like he has to do with Christian Laettner.
Yeah.
It's and the NCAA tournament is just unique that way because you lose a tough game 1 in a 7-game series, you got some time to try and get back. You lose that game, your season's over. And you were right. I mean, look, St. John's been a nice feel-good story, but make no mistake, they were a top 5 team in the beginning of the year that took some time to get together. So for them to not get to the Sweet 16 this year would have been a real disappointment, especially in year 3, Patino. We write all kinds of poetry about Patino in year 2, but he does pretty special things in year 3 too. Year 3 at Kentucky was the unforgettables team that needed Christian Laettner to go 10 for 10 and 10 for 10 in order to beat them. And this is year 3 for them here. They really needed to get to Washington. I agree with you on that.
Yeah, no, and they did. And, to me, the hero of the game for them was Bryce Hopkins because, they took 35, they hit 11. I mean, they're shooting 35 3-pointers. I mean, to me, I'm watching this and I'm saying, this is not St. John's game. And I understand I think that's what Patino wanted them to do because that's because Kansas really played great defense as well in this game. There's no doubt about it. St. John's was having trouble getting shots, all night long. But Hopkins was the star. I mean, he hit 6 3-pointers. And what gets lost in the shuffle, Mike, is the 3 he hit with about a minute or so left. They
from 1 to 4
to 1, and he hits a 3 right in front of the St. John's bench. I mean, I really thought when you break this game down, all right, Darling shot obviously, but that's the biggest shot of the night as far as I'm
concerned. And I think that he gets lost in the shuffle a little bit because Zuby is so great. Last night he got lost in the shuffle because Ian Jackson was terrific. Yep. And of course Darling, makes the only shot he made with the only time he shot it with the wrong hand. Go figure, right? The way these things work out. But it's definitely Bryce Hopkins that I think has been the key to the St. John's resurgence. I mean, coming into the game, the last 4 games they jumped out to leads of 40-0 in their last 4 games. It's easy to play when you're playing from 10 points ahead.
Sure.
Before the first TV timeout every night. It wasn't that way yesterday, but Hopkins, he was a little spotty this year. coming back from an injury. I think he felt a little bit too much pressure. It's funny. I think it was almost liberating for him to almost get his head taken off in that Providence game on with that
yeah.
brawl. Because I was really impressed in there because he didn't get kicked out of the game. There's a lot of ball players, even mild mannered ball players. You get fouled like that, you're going to take your swings, and then you're going to regret it a few seconds later. But he never did. He was brought to the side by a Providence guy who probably deserves an award for that, but he never went after him. And it really seems like his season has turned since then. He's been terrific the last 6, 7, 8 games. He's been really good. And, I think it's important because we all remember how last year ended. And their best player, R.J. Lewis, was terrified down the stretch. He didn't want to. He checked out. I think a lot of people got on Patino then, but I was in the same seat last year at those games, Joe.
Yep.
And I can see and the thing is, you think, well, you got to keep shooting. These are the same people who, for 40 years, have been yelling at Pat Riley and kept letting John Stark shoot the ball. Patino saw that this was a player who checked out. He was scared. The moment was too big for him, and the result was they lost the game. This year's team, you don't see a lot of fear. Even let's be honest, that first half was a hard thing to watch. I mean, both teams were terrible. They couldn't shoot. They couldn't make a shot for long stretches at a time.
Looked like Miami Knicks.
It really did. And it didn't bother St. John's nearly as much as it bothered Kansas because St. John's just shrugged it off, and they just get back and play defense. I think that helps because if you're just going to get after it on defense and that travels, you figure the offense will come along. And I think that's what St. John's, the big difference for them this year as opposed to last year. Plus, I don't think this year's Kansas team is nearly as good as last year's Arkansas team was, as it turned out. But it all works out in the end, and they have more games to play, which is a really cool thing for St. John's fans who have waited 27 years for that.
And I guess we got the great Mike Vaccaro of the New York Post, who's so nice of us to get off the plane from San Diego and come in and do this for me this morning. I look at this Duke game. I don't know how you feel about it. Okay, Duke, who did not play, they really survived Siena. Siena gave them all they wanted in that first round game. They kind of, in the second half, wound up blowing TCU away when all was said and done. But I look at this game. It's hard to say house money for St. John's, but let's say this, Mike. The pressure's on Duke in this game, and I understand that we want to see St. John's make a big run and the whole deal, but.
Sure.
If they lose this game, okay, and I think they got a great chance. So I don't know. I mean, we'll see. They're playing, basically freshmen with the Boozer brothers and all of that, But the pressure's on Duke. I mean, they're a 6.5-point favorite already. How about that? How about that going into this game against Duke on Friday?
Yeah, Joe, I'm with you. I don't think it's necessarily a house money game for St. John's because I think they're a damn good team. I guarantee you they're not going to be scared when they're on the floor that day. They're just not. That's not how they're wired. It's not how they're made up. And Duke is always going to feel more pressure just because of who they are and what they've been. Right. It's an earned, I think, place in the sports stratosphere. Look, Kansas had that too. They're not as good this year, but they sure had a pretty good player on the floor yesterday. And St. John's wasn't cowed by him, wasn't cowed by Rock Chalk Jayhawk or any of the other stuff. It was definitely a pro Kansas vibe to the game yesterday. I mean, there's a lot of St. John's fans there, but you're talking about it's half the distance for Jayhawks fans to go as opposed to Johnny's fans out to San Diego. But look, I mean, I think I'm going to say it's not a house money game for the Johnnies because they're that good, and I'm going to give them more than a puncher's chance. I mean, I know that's the thing you say in a game like this, but they have a legit chance because they're going to defend. You know what? And the thing about that TCU game with Duke, I think TCU gave up the ghost a little bit once they got a couple of bad whistles and they got a couple of technicals and whatnot. And the one ridiculous call where the kid got called for a flagrant for not, making sure that he didn't break his skull, which is one of the stranger flagrant flaws I've ever seen.
Right.
But anybody who wants to have, who wants to talk about the whistles Duke gets, I mean, there's testimony.
Get ready for that Thursday night, Mike. Get ready for that. Duke's going to get all the calls.
Because they always do.
Friday night.
Yeah, for sure. So, but St. John's isn't going to stop defending you because the thing of it is, the guys, if they get in foul trouble, the guys they bring in, they're going to play just as hard. I mean, Ruben Prey.
He's a good player.
Yes. I think he's going to be really good here. Right now, he's just he's a very much of a role player, but he's everywhere. He always gets his hands on the ball. nobody wants to. You can see the people who he's defending. They're like, not this guy again, because his motor goes forever. And they have like two or three guys like that they just bring off the bench. That you don't care if they score or not. Then there's, that's the great thing about this team. Like, Dylan Mitchell. I mean, actually, at times you hope he doesn't shoot so much, but he does so many other great things.
Yep.
And all of that together is why this is a dangerous team for everybody else. And it's funny. I think I wrote this in my running more than I wrote about it later on, but I think it's true. The thing of it is, a lot of times, Danny Hurley always talks about how the fact that, when we play in the league, everybody knows us, everybody's familiar, it's every game is a war. It's when we get out of the league that you see how good we really are. You didn't see that with St. John's this year, because when they were playing their rugged non-league schedule, they were still getting to know each other's names. So you really didn't see that, but now you are, and even in the Big East, I mean, they did really well in the Big East, obviously, but now, I mean, you could really see with Kansas, they were like, they looked like they were playing 5-on-7, because they're just not used to a team that's going to pick up the ball every single time they throw it in bounds, and it's funny because, it's different than the Kentucky presses that he would throw at teams back in the day, because in those days he would press you all over the course. He would trap you. I mean, he'd be doing a lot of 1-2, 1-1s, and there'd be traps. St. John, I don't think I've ever seen St. John's trap this year. They just go straight up man to man for 94 feet, and after a while, that just becomes aggravating for teams, and they wind up losing their legs as a result. And that's the stuff that I think is going to carry St. John's. If they're going to get past Duke on Friday, we're going to have a lot of talk on Saturday about it. It was another magnificent defensive effort, and player X, Y, or Z actually stepped up and had a great offensive game. But it was the defense that allowed them to win the game, which is what it was yesterday.
Yeah, no question about it. And how many times did you see Kansas had a ton of turnovers? And how many times did they have trouble just even inbounding the basketball in the game?
It gets to a team after a while, Joe. And that's the thing, the stuff I was talking about with Hurley saying, they in their league, they don't see guys like a team like that. That St. John's is just different. The Big East is a rugged, the better teams in the Big East aren't just good, but they're rugged. And, St. John's, in a regular time of college basketball, probably would have had a pretty good preseason, because there would have been some familiarity, and they probably would have won that Kentucky game. They probably would have won that Iowa State game, which they were right there in. Maybe Alabama blew them out, but whatever. Look, I mean, I'm not saying they would win every game, but when you really see the difference of a Big East team is when they play somebody else, because they're not used to it, and that's what's always been like with UConn. You saw them. I mean, they didn't just win those two NCAA championships; they tore through them.
Oh,
and
yeah.
they never had a game in those runs like St. John's had last night, or that they had on Friday night, UConn. But you know what? I mean, that's the reason why I really do like St. I'm not sure if I'm going to pick them yet. I think I probably will, though, because to me, I just think that they have no fear. And that's what you have to have primarily. At a bright lights Friday night against Duke, you really need to just believe in yourself. And this team has a lot of self-belief right now.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, how great is that Eastern region? You got Michigan State and UConn on the other side. And how great would it be, Mike, to have a fourth match between UConn and St. John's? I don't know how I feel about that game. I got to say that. I don't know how I would feel about that game from, root to St. John's here, obviously. But, that would be pretty cool if that happens. Let's see him beat Duke first. And maybe Pitino gets that, revenge 30-plus years later for the lateness shot.
Yeah. As a kid who grew up as a big St. John's fan, Joe, I mean, I remember the fourth meeting with Georgetown didn't go so well back in '85.
Oh, my God.
So I'm not going to mention that after I just mentioned it to you, because it's called Oh the Pain. So why not bring up some St. John's pain too? I'm sorry. What?
Yeah. Well, they had lost 2 out of 3 to them as well. Remember, they beat them in Washington. Yeah. They went down to D.C. and beat them down there. And they were number one. They beat them. They were number 1 in the country. And then they lost to them in the Big East final. And obviously they got absolutely destroyed in the Final Four game.
Right. Yeah, and look, that said, the rematch game, remember, was the famous sweater game when John Thompson showed up with his Carnesecca sweater, one of the great gamesmanship moves you'll ever see. And look, I mean, Georgetown was always the better of those two teams, but the thing is, those St. John's team were good enough to play with anybody, and they beat a lot of good teams. They would beat Carolina in that stretch. They beat everybody they played, but Georgetown was the one that had a championship and really should have won a second. And that was on cause. I mean, Villanova had to play literally a perfect game to beat them. That's what it took to beat that team. And St. John's didn't have it in them in the semifinals, but Villanova did in the finals.
Yeah, And really, I mean, that Georgetown team could have easily won 3 and 4 years. I mean,
For sure.
the game against North Carolina, unfortunately, Freddie Brown throws the ball to James Worthy. We'll never,
Yep, that was a great.
we'll never forget. And I got to tell you one thing. I want to go back to that game for a second.
Yeah.
If I can, Mike, 1982,
Sure.
one of the
Always.
great finals of all time.
Yep.
And little did Benigno know that when Michael Jordan hit that shot, right, that this would come back, against Ewing, that this would come back to haunt me forever.
You probably thought that was such. You thought that was such a cute little story. Look at the freshman making the shot. Isn't that nice? What'll ever happen to young Michael Jeffrey? I wonder.
Oh my God! Right? How bad?
Yeah.
Little did I know how much pain that would cause me as the years went on.
What I loved about that game, Joe, if you remember, right, the first like 10 or 12 Carolina points, all scored on goaltending, and Thompson told Patrick, swipe everything that goes up. Which I mean, what coach in their right mind is going to give that strategy today? I mean, that's one of the things that was so great about college basketball in those days. The characters. I mean, who would give that? Who would give that strategy today, right? Look, I mean, I guess the one carryover is Pitino, right? Because when who knows if it really went on the way that he said it went on last night, but the way he told the story, Dean Darling said, "I'm going to call this play," and he's like, "What? You haven't made a shot all day? What are you nuts? You're calling your own number?" But of course, that was really the only opportunity they had because, I mean, they weren't going to get fouled again, but they weren't going to be able to set up like an intricate play with 3.9.
No.
So basically, Pitino, and it's hilarious. Pitino talked the other day about wanting to get his players to shoot more threes, Isaiah Sellers specifically. And he said, I just don't get it. If a coach ever told me I could shoot whatever I wanted, I'd shoot 30 times a game. And I got news for you, Joe. I've done research on Pitino's career at St. Dom's on Long Island on Oyster Bay. He's right. He would shoot 30 times a game if his coach gave him the ball enough.
Yeah.
I'd play for him. I'd play for him. I'd play hard for him. Give me the ball, coach.
Yeah, there you go. No question about it. We're talking to the great Mike Vaccaro. It's funny, because I go back when I started watching St. John's. Joe Lapchick was the coach. I mean, okay. I go back.
Not the first time. The second time. Not the first time with Lapchick. Lapchick had two tenures there.
Yeah, right. No,
I don't think you were seeing a lot of his games in the 40s, the wartime. Yeah.
Yeah, he coached the Knicks as well, but
right.
Yeah, no, I mean, I go back to the McIntyre brothers, if you remember them, Sonny Dove, of course.
Gus Alfieri. Yep, good teams.
Go way back to those guys, no doubt about it. I hope they win. I want to see. Here's what I want to see. I want to see if they get to the Final Four. I want to see Pitino wearing the white suit in the Final Four. Do you think he will, Mike? What do you think about that?
I don't put anything past him. Do you? So no. Why not? That'd be great. Be like, it's like. I'm sorry that John Lennon only wore that suit once on the cover of Abbey Road. I mean, if he lived long enough, maybe he would have, taken that out of mothballs at some point. Yeah.
I have one too.
I know you do. I was going to say, the three people I know who can wear suits like that are John Lennon, Rick Pitino, and you.
Yeah, that's it. You know what? Lennon wasn't Italian, but you generally have to be Italian to wear a white suit. But,
Very true. I guess Tony Manero wore it pretty good too. You're right.
Yeah, that's the great, right. Tony
so make it 4.
Right. Saturday Night Fever, the great John Travolta, of course.
Right.
Talking to the great Mike Vaccaro, no doubt about it. All right. By the way, one last comment. You were there, so you didn't see this.
Sure.
CBS did a tremendous. What a shot of Bill Self as this will always resonate in my mind. They're showing like at the after the game's over, they had interviewed whoever it was, I forget who it was, the girl Sahadi, that's who it was,
right?
Who interviewed Darling, and I don't think she interviewed Pitino, but at the very end, the last shot, you see Bill Self kind of looking back like this, wow, did that just happen?
That happened right. Shot. It's funny. I actually did see it, Joe, because that happened right in front of me. I was sitting there, we're on this vicious deadline, so I'm trying to sprint, or as much as I can sprint these days, back to the press room so I can finish up my first edition story. But Bill Self was standing right in front of me, so I wanted to see what he was doing. He did. He looked like he looked like he was lost in Wonderland. Like he just, I think I think he believed that he had the better team yesterday, and I mean, look, he's a terrific coach. I mean, he's got the 2 championships too, and what he did in the final minute was a masterclass. Because the thing of it was, I mean, especially they had to take 4 fouls, right? Because they only had 2. They had to take 4. The first 2 they took them to where they couldn't. St. John's couldn't even advance the ball. Right. They had to retake it out of bounds. So not only is it taking more time, but that's not always an easy inbounds play. So 2 of those times happened. The third time, it was still like 3/4 court, so it was still asking a lot. And like I said, I think maybe they, but he can only do so much. I think the player probably got impatient, and if he could have waited another minute, another second rather, I think that would have almost guaranteed overtime. And I think if it went to overtime, frankly, I think Kansas wins the game.
Yeah, I agree.
But you know what?
I'm with you. I think
That's
Kansas
why.
would have won.
I mean, it's hard to believe that we existed for all these years, looking at scoreboard clocks that didn't go to a tenth of a second, right? Because it's amazing how often when what you see, whether it's a shot clock violation or a game clock violation, it goes down to 0.3, 0.2, 0.9, and that's the difference in winning and losing. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, it really is, no doubt about it. And again, we're talking to the great Mike Vaccaro. I want to get your book in here, Mike, and
yes, sir.
Maybe a little bit on the Knicks too. But let me just get my the Knicks who are rolling playing all these cupcakes. But anyway, whatever.
Yeah. That's what the cupcakes are there for.
I don't get nuts to the playoffs.
I know you don't. And in fairness, you refused to get nuts when they were in a real sideways
when
funk.
Lost 9 out of 11, I wasn't.
Yeah,
nuts.
you weren't. You were just as zen then too. So I give you credit for that.
Yep, I won't be zen when the playoffs start.
No, you won't. But that's okay. You got something to talk about. If your team's made you happy-go-lucky all the time, nobody would want to listen.
Yeah, now you got that
wrong?
right. Well, my team's not happy-go-lucky all the time.
No, they're not.
Nobody has them less happy-go-lucky than I do. But anyway, let me get my sponsors in here, Mike, and I want to get to the book
for sure
and all of that. I've been telling you about Manscaped for a long time, and I implore the people at Manscaped. My wife actually brought this up. They should have Womanscaped. You got Manscaped for the men, right? You should have Womanscaped for the ladies, right? So I think that it's time for Manscaped to have Womanscaped. I mean, come on. Let's go, all right? Let's not, we don't need to be, I don't even know what the word is, but prejudice to the men. Let's get the Womanscaped in there, too. I've been telling you about that for a long time. You know about Manscaped and their Performance Package 5.0, which takes care of you on your face, makes you smooth. I'm not good looking, Mike, but I'm very smooth.
I would disagree, but that's a matter of opinion. I think you're a very good looking man, Joe.
My wife will tell you I'm extremely smooth. But anyway, that's how I wound up with her. But nevertheless, the 5.0 Ultra, check it out. It takes care of you on your face. You get all nice and, like I said, nice and smooth for the ladies. And then you got the 5.0 Ultra Lawnmower for the lower areas, which also, works out for you too. And as I've said, Mike, for many years, now, it also gives you the illusion of extra inches, and we all want that. So, why not, right? Why not?
Why not?
I don't know any guys that don't want that. So, even if it's not really there, at least the illusion is good in this area too. So, check out Manscaped. Check out the Performance Package, the Ultra, and also, of course, the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra. You get 15% off with your entire order with the code PAIN at manscaped.com. 15% off with the code PAIN, manscaped.com. Stay on top of your grooming game. Be ready for anything that comes your way. And it's time for the Manscaped people to have Womanscaped as well, as my lovely wife has pointed out. Now, if you're looking for a nice vacation, check out our good friends at the Carolina Resort Vacation. And it's a perfect vacation spot. Check out Carolina Resort, OBL Resort Vacations, OBLV Unit 2 in beautiful North Myrtle Beach. 5 spacious bedrooms, each with a private en-suite bathroom, hello convenience, a fully stocked kitchen ready for family meals or group cooking nights, arcade-style gaming table, 150-plus classic games, smart TVs in every room, entertainment for everyone, just steps from the beach, minutes from the Barefoot Landing, the mini golf, the Ripley's Aquarium, Myrtle Beach Boardwalk, of course, all the great golf courses. Check it out. The unit is freshly renovated, spotless, and spacious, perfect for family trips, group getaways, or a relaxing retreat by the ocean. Whether you're soaking up the sun, exploring the local attractions, just enjoying time together, OBLV Unit 2 Carolina Resort Vacation makes every trip unforgettable. 843-249-6509. Visit CarolinaRealty.com. Learn more. Start planning your trip today. Tell them Benigno sent you. And, of course, my good friends, my son and company at Need a Discount Tire in beautiful Rivervale, New Jersey. Mike, of course, knows well about Rivervale. Check it out. It's on Westwood Avenue in Rivervale, New Jersey. See my son Johnny. See his boss Harry. Whatever you need. You need tires. You need any kind of work on your car. You need your car inspected. Anita Discount Tire. Beautiful Rivervale, New Jersey. One of my favorite towns. I got my first hole-in-one there at the Rivervale Golf Course. And, of course, Westwood Avenue, Rivervale, New Jersey. All right. Benigno, the Yoda Pain Podcast. The great Mike Vaccaro of the New York Post. is with us. He's got his new book, The Bosses of the Bronx. I'll put it on again. They got a nice excerpt of it today in the Post as well. And it's all about the Steinbrenners and owning the Yankees and all of that. Let me ask you this, Mike. What inspired you to, I mean, obviously, you know how I feel about the boss. Even though I'm a Met fan, I love the boss. I wish he owned all the teams I rooted for. I wouldn't have the issues I have today. There's no doubt about it. Should be in the Hall of Fame. You talk about that as well in the book. What inspired you to write about Steinbrenner?
To be honest with you, I was just looking for a compelling subject. Joe, I'd written 3 books in 5 years about 15 years ago, and I took a little bit of a break from that because I was a little tired after doing that. They were fun to do and enjoyable, but I really wanted to wait till I had an enjoyable subject that I wanted to sink my teeth into. And I was having a discussion with Sean Desmond, who became my editor at HarperCollins, and he suggested something on Steinbrenner. And as we talked about it, we started talking about, there have been a lot of biographies written about Steinbrenner. I mean, Bill Madden wrote a terrific one about just before he passed away. And I didn't want to do a biography, so to speak, because there's really not much to say from that realm. But, just the narrative from the day he bought the team, which was January 3rd, 1973, and now it really changed everything. And it changed everything, obviously, in New York. It changed everything clearly with the Yankees, but really in baseball, too. When on the day he took over the Yankees, they were a clear number 2 in town to the Mets. I mean, even more so than it became later on in the 80s when the Mets kind of briefly took the town back. I mean, in 73, the Mets are outdrawing the Yankees 2.5-1. I mean, it wasn't even close. Yankee Stadium was falling down. South Bronx was an unappetizing place to play. There was all kinds of talk that, forget New Jersey. I mean, New Orleans was actually making a real pitch for the Yankees because they were building the Superdome. And, there was thought that maybe New York City just needed a second baseball team anymore, as amazing as that seems. And that's when he took, when he bought the team. And look, I mean, it was a depressed asset. They got a great price for him. But, a trick that he learned in his own, on the other side of the table later on, they weren't the highest bidder. There was another group that offered CBS about $2 or $3 million more, but they weren't willing to say we're not moving the team. George saw that there was a chance to actually, come in a couple of $1 million less than what was wanted by CBS by agreeing to stay in New York. And frankly, that's all George Steinbrenner really ever wanted, was to be able to be a big guy in New York. And so the opportunity to own the Yankees obviously has its own benefits, but being a player in New York, look, he spent a lot of times as a businessman in Cleveland, flying on business into New York, and he invariably being a middle seat and coach. And he'd tell his friends, one of these days I'm going to fly first class into New York, one of these days. And his favorite place to go to was 21, because that's, if you felt like a big shot if you got a table at 21. And invariably, when he was in Cleveland, the secretary would call ahead and he'd get a upstairs room at 4:00 in the afternoon. And by the end of his life, he could have had the entire restaurant for any time he wanted. That's just, what New York, the opportunity New York provided for George. And he saw that. And later on, that's really how he helped recruit Catfish Hunter and Reggie Jackson, the 2 real cornerstone free agents that turned the Yankees around for good. I mean, in Catfish's, for Catfish, the Padres had offered $2 million more. Ray Kroc sold a couple extra Happy Meals that month. And, when it was Reggie, it was the Expos offering $2 million more. But Catfish, it appealed to him to do what he was doing already in Oakland as a Yankee. He thought it would solidify his Hall of Fame case, and he was right. Reggie just loved being Reggie in New York, and he loved everything about New York. And George saw that. He saw that while he might not be willing to go top dollar, he could provide things that nobody else could, like people just adoring Reggie when he was walking the streets of New York on his recruiting visit. All these cab drivers are yelling at him. It was almost like it was set up. Yeah. It wasn't set up. That was just New York. And Reggie loved it. Reggie signed on. And, so I think there's a misperception of George that all he ever did was throw money at problems, which really isn't the case at all. Now, obviously, he had plenty of resources. And as time went on, he had more resources than anybody else for a time. But that wasn't the only way he fixed things. And of course, sadly, it was also some of the reasons why things became unfixed later on under his tenure. But and it's all that good and bad, Joe, that to me made him a really compelling figure to write about. Because if you're just writing about a guy who's always good and one guy who's always bad, that gets boring after a while. This guy was often both in the same day.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. And, just watching, that whole era of the 70s, they win, and you write about it in the book. They win the pennant in 1976. They get absolutely blasted by, one of the great teams of all time in the Big Red Machine. They get swept in 4 in that World Series. And you talk about it. I mean, Montreal, and I could never see Reggie Jackson playing for the Montreal Expos. I mean, come on, that was
I don't think Reggie could either. But as he
they
put it,
offered more money.
$5 million is $5 million. In those days, that was a lot of money.
Yeah,
he wound up signing for 2.96. So I mean, it was significantly more than what the Yankees were. But yeah, there's no way Reggie was going to bring his act to Canada. No shot.
No way that was happening. And he was. I remember he left the A's. He was actually with the Orioles for a year. He
had
played
a good year with them too.
He played with Baltimore. People forget that. He didn't come right from Oakland.
Yeah, he had a good year.
I thought it was interesting too that at the press conference when they announced him, you got Thurman on one side, Roy White is kind of putting the hat on him on the other side, right? I thought that was pretty interesting when he did that, and he had one of his championship rings on, right? He
sure did.
One of the 3 he won in Oakland. He had one of the championship rings on as well, and he also says how he's bringing his star.
Yeah,
that was the star in New York. No, I'm bringing my star to New York.
Right. Yeah, that was when Thurman and Roy kind of heard that and they rolled their eyes like, "Oh boy, here we go."
Right.
It's a little different around here now, and it was. I mean, look,
he's the greatest free agent signing in the history of New York. There's no, and maybe in the history of free agent signings. I mean, I'm hard pressed to think who was a bigger deal, and the fact that he delivered like he did. The whole thing with the straw that stirs the drink, and Thurman obviously wasn't happy with him and all of that. Billy Martin hated him. I mean, how about that aspect of it? Oh. Billy didn't want him. You write about it in the book.
Right from the
Billy
start,
did not want. They were talking about all these other guys, Bobby Grich, Joe Rudy. They're talking about these guys, and Billy wanted no part of Reggie. Right?
No part of him. I mean, the guy Billy wanted was Joe Rudy, who was exactly. Right. If you're going to build a Billy Martin ball player in a laboratory, Joe Rudy's probably who you would come up with. I mean, just a fundamentally sound, did everything well. Didn't do anything great, but did everything well. It was a winner, had been on 3 World Series titles. So that's of course Reggie had been too, but Reggie was a little more flamboyant in doing what he did. Now I guess to Billy's credit or whatever, I mean, he didn't want Reggie from the beginning, but he realized in the organizational meeting the day after the '76 World Series that he was probably going to get voted down because the only vote that mattered was the guy who said, "You know what, Reggie puts fannies in the seats," and he did. He delivered that, and it was a to go back and you and I both lived through it. I was a little younger than you at the time, but I remember reading the papers every day and remembering how crazy it was. And I think it's only when you go back now with a little bit of hindsight you realize it really was crazy. I mean, you're talking about every day it was the back page. George was on the back page, but talking about the Yankees in January. I mean, that just wasn't done in those days. There was an off season then, but not to George. And look, I mean, speaking from the media standpoint, I mean, he fed us for 37 years. And obviously it's hilarious now with Hal in charge. I mean, he couldn't be more diametrically opposite to his father, certainly in personality. Right. And so. We had that little brief kind of when Hank was kind of the spokesman for about a year. That was fun. That also you could pretty much tell in the moment it was unsustainable because he was even crazier in some ways than his dad was in terms of the things he'd be willing to tell you. But look, I mean, George was gold, and and that's the thing. Rite of passage for a guy who wanted to write about baseball in New York. I mean, you had to be able to get George on the phone. It was always a challenge. He always made you earn it. I tell a couple of stories about that, and at the end of the day, if he trusted you, he would give you some stuff. Then he'd get mad at you, and you'd wake up and it'd be in somebody else's paper, and then he'd make up with you, and suddenly you had a back page too. I mean, he knew how to play that game better than anybody who's ever lived it. Better, I think, than even a lot of the reporters who were benefiting from getting their stories on the back page so often.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Again, we're talking to Mike Vaccaro, his great book, The Bosses of the Bronx. How about the relationship? And, Thurman was certainly in the beginning. Thurman did not, especially with that comment, the straw that stirs the drink and all of that. How about that? It took Thurman a little while to come around with Reggie, right?
And the irony is that it was Thurman who basically gave George the stamp of approval. I mean, before he ever recruited Reggie, he took Thurman out to dinner after the '76 season. Thurman had a great year that year, MVP. Yep. And so George took him out just to celebrate. And he said, well, what do you think about Reggie? And Thurman said, go get that guy. He will make us a World Series champion. That guy knows how to win. That guy plays harder than you think. That guy plays every day. He cares. He's a gamer. He'll do it in New York. George, if you can get him, we got to get the big guy. That's what he told him. And of course, Thurman probably regretted that a couple months later. But I think he always understood. Like, I mean, I didn't cover Thurman. This is just people that I know who covered him well. The tales that they've always said is that, look, he was a grouchy guy, and he made everybody earn kind of his friendship or his attention, but he also just wanted to win. And he went through a lot of bad years with the Yankees. His first 4 or 5 years with the Yankees, He really wanted to win here. And at the end of the day, saw that Reggie was a guy who's going to help that happen. But he was also a very prideful guy. He didn't want to be the captain. George had to talk him into it. Thurman didn't want to be Lou Gehrig's successor. They didn't have a captain for all the years from when after Gehrig died until George named Thurman. But George was a football coach, believed in the importance of a captain of a team, and he talked Thurman into doing it. And look, I mean, in retrospect, Thurman was the perfect captain because everybody on the team revered him and sought out his leadership, and he played a leadership position, obviously. But he didn't necessarily want to be captain, but he wanted to be respected. And there was nobody who was more respected on that team in the 75, 76, certainly 76. He was the MVP of the league in 76. He wasn't just a...
Yep. And he had a great World Series, too. Even though they lost, he was great in the World Series. Great in the World Series. I mean, him and Johnny Bench both put on a show that World Series. And, Bench had a better team around him at that time. But it's a very prideful guy. So, really, Reggie could have said anything in the world except that, basically intimating that I'm going to come here and fix things that weren't able to be fixed when Thurman was here. He didn't say it in those words, but that's what straw that stirred the drink. Was the second part of that quote, which is the one that really burned Thurman, was Thurman can only stir it bad. And I think I know Reggie has regretted saying that. He's gone some years saying he never said it, but the author's a pretty reputable guy. I believe him. And look, Reggie would have been angrier than he's been through the years if he didn't really say it. So he said it, and he knows that stuff, that last part of it was wrong. And Thurman, made life hard for him for a long time. But yet, if you see the tape of Game 6 of the 77 World Series, who's the first guy out of the dugout to give him a hug? It's Thurman. And who's the second guy? It's Billy Martin. So, winning is a wonderful Band-Aid. I mean, we can tell stories about the 86 Mets that sound pretty similar. They didn't much like each other a lot of times, but they would fight for each other and they play for each other. And that's when you have a great team. And, really those 86 Mets were just embodying the spirit, the soul of the Bronx Zoo Yankees, 77, 78, when they just knew how to figure it out, especially in 78, and not just the big comeback against the Red Sox, but winning that playoff game and, spotting the Royals a game, spotting the Dodgers too. And they kept coming back. And we talked earlier about St. John's. I mean, I don't want to get sacrilegious here, but this St. John's team reminds me of that 78 team in that they play bad and say, well, that's not who we are. We'll be better tomorrow. We'll be fine. They believed in themselves implicitly, and they won the World Series. And that's kind of that's the strain I'm talking about that I see in the St. John's team, that they don't let their bad play ruin their game or ruin their day. And that was definitely the case with 78. And look, 78 was probably helped along, if I'm being honest, by the fact that the newspapers went on strike in August. And so all of this daily drama didn't have any place to play itself out. Probably didn't have, I mean, I don't know if you can scientifically say that's why it happened, but certainly the guys in that team will say it didn't hurt. Yeah, no, you're right about that. No doubt. 78 was unbelievable. And to me, look, the greatest I got to say this, okay? And again, I'm saying this from a Met fan perspective, and game, the 16-inning game in the playoffs against Houston in 86 was, to me, the greatest Met game of all time. I mean,
sure, I would agree with that.
I don't even think it's debatable. But when I think of pitch by pitch for pitch drama in a baseball game, the Bucky Dent game, the game against the Red Sox in Fenway in 78. And what's funny about that? I look at that game, and the Red Sox, how many Hall of Famers did the Red Sox have? They had Yastrzemski. They had Rice. They had Carlton Fisk. I know he wasn't involved in the game, but they had Dennis Eckersley on that team. They had all these and I don't
in the moment, Fred Lynn was a guy who was always being called a surefire future Hall of Famer, and it just didn't. He got hurt a bunch.
White Evans, another one who was close. I mean, that was an unbelievable team.
Yeah, it was a great team.
And that game,
the thing was, I'm sorry, but also the thing about great that people remember the Sox as big chokers, which is unfortunate because yes, of course they frittered away a big lead, but they actually went behind by 3.5 games after they
Yeah.
lost the lead.
Yeah.
And they had to win the final 8 games of the season just to get to the playoffs. Think about that. So
Yes.
they're playing 8 straight elimination games, basically, and they won all 8 of them. And they're up 2-0 after going into the 7th inning of the playoff game. That you're right. I mean, the fact you have these two just great teams. And, in a lot of ways, it was even more amazing than when they renewed the rivalry later on, because, and yes, obviously, it's maybe it's a better story because the Red Sox were able to actually fight back later on finally. But you're right. The players in the field, those games were just incredible. You watch that playoff game, it's just a well-played game. A lot of smart baseball players, too. And don't forget the play Lupinella made in right field when he couldn't see the ball and put his arm out where he thought it was going to be. And there it was. It's a lot of smart players, great players. Yeah, man, that gets you. I'm gonna get trapped in a deep dive of nostalgia now because it really those are good times to watch baseball. Even if you weren't a Yankees fan, it was just a good time to watch baseball.
One of the great games of all time, and the Mets at that point were a disaster after the Seaver trade and all that. I don't want to get it. I'm
well. The one thing I'll say about those Mets, Joe, and I think you'll appreciate this, right? People talk about the differences between Hal and George, and there's plenty. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit too. But let's not forget that when George was trying to make his stand in New York and take New York back from New York, he wasn't going against Steve Cohen and his $22 billion pocket change. No. He was going up against Lorinda DeRoulet, who tried to see if he could get foul balls sent back into play so they could wash him and use him the next day. That's who George was going up against with the other team in New York. So it's a little different with that. But those are the good old days, right, Joe?
Oh, please. You don't want to get me going. You know how
No, I don't. No.
You don't want to get me going.
Not today. We got to talk about the book. We can't talk about M. Donald Grant today.
Right. No M. Donald Grant. 2 other instances I want to bring up. I want to bring up the classic game in Fenway in 1977, the national TV, Saturday afternoon, game of the week, when Billy pulls Reggie out of right field in Fenway, and he basically they're fighting in the dugout. Elston Howard and Yogi got to separate. Touch on that, Mike.
Yeah, look, that's really. Don't forget, it was only a couple of days earlier that, for the first time in a couple of years, the Mets had taken all the back pages because they just traded Tom Seaver.
Right.
And in fact, that same day is the day that Tom Seaver made his first start in Montreal as a Red. So it was pretty busy day. Right. And of course, it's national TV. It's hilarious because this whole incident takes place and the NBC cameras are watching, and Dick Hauser, trying to be a good wingman for his manager, takes a towel and puts it over the camera in the Yankees dugout, and he thinks he's done a good thing. Except the problem is, the one in the other dugout was working just fine, and you saw everything. You saw Reggie walk in the dugout. You saw him take off his glove. You saw him take off his glasses because he didn't know what was coming with this crazy manager angry at him. And you saw Elston Howard basically prevent Billy Martin from taking a swing at Reggie. And, I'm not sure it would have gone well for Billy. Great fighter, but, Reggie probably had him by 80 pounds.
Easy.
And, Reggie knew how to use his fists too. So that happens, and the thing I love about that story, which is in the book, is the fact that watching all of this happen in real time in a restaurant in Cleveland, his hometown, was George Steinbrenner. He watched the entire thing on TV in a local affiliate in Cleveland, and he's watching. He's like, "What in the world is going on with my baseball team? This is crazy!" And he's like, "What have I done here? What kind of maniacs have I put together in a clubhouse?" And of course, the amazing thing is nobody got fired that year. Billy was the manager all the way there. Almost got fired then. But, both Reggie, and to Reggie's credit, he realized that as mad as he was, if he had been responsible for Billy getting fired, it never would have happened for him in New York. He probably wouldn't have made it through the year because Yankee fans were very pro Billy for most of his time. It got a little, they got off him a little bit, in tenure 4 and tenure 5. But in those days, there was no more popular Yankee than the manager, and it burned Steinbrenner that my newspaper right after the, they wanted, he wound up having to fire him in 78, ran a poll. Who would you rather see go, Billy Martin or George Steinbrenner? And the fans came back 99% for, rather see George go. And Jerry Liska, who ran sports at that time, couldn't believe this. There's no way that's the right poll number. So he made them do a recount. And the guy said, "You're right, boss, it's wrong." It was actually 99.3. So that's who Billy Martin was too. So Reggie knew he couldn't take on Billy and win. That just wasn't going to happen. And, like I said, no one got fired. And 3 months later, Reggie's hitting 3 home runs in the World Series. He's Mr. October. And I mean, honestly, I can't tell you how many times I wanted to write the words and never did because they would have been written 15 times. You can't make it up because you really can't make it up when it came to the George Yankees. I mean, he wasn't always the primary figure in all of these things, but he was always the guy with the marionette. And there's a famous picture of him in New York Magazine.
Yeah, I remember that.
With the marionette over Yankee Stadium. And that's who he was. And that's, that's why this book was so much fun to write and actually it was why it was so hard to edit, to be honest with you, because I mentioned Sean Desmond, my editor, earlier. I mean, probably the original first take of this book was probably in the 550, 600 page range. And you can't write 600 page books anymore. No one wants to read that one. And I understood that, but there was so much good stuff. And the thing is, yes, George was responsible for a lot of it. The stuff that came out was a lot of stuff that was really just Billy and Reggie or Reggie and Thurman. And it was fun, but it's the kind of thing where, if you want people to actually read the book, you have to give them the wheat, not the chaff. And so hopefully what's left is the wheat.
I want to get to the Torre years too before, and again, we're talking to the great Mike Vaccaro. It's funny you talk about an 800-page book. So I'm a big fan of not just sports history, but history in general.
Sure.
Right? And I'm a big fan of the great general, great 18th president Ulysses S. Grant. Big fan of his. Mm-hmm. Okay, love him. So I wanted to get a book on Grant. My wife gets me this book on Ulysses S. Grant. Great book. But it's 800 pages, Mike.
Yeah,
and I have gotten through about 450. I'm just past the point now of Lincoln being assassinated. Grant's not president yet.
Right.
Okay, and that's kind of where I am. I still got about 400 pages to go. I got to get myself geared up again to read the rest of it. So
probably the greatest book I've ever read that's nonfiction is The Power Broker. Robert Caro about Robert Moses. I mean, it's hard for me to say it's my
Moses in New York. Yeah,
it's hard for me to say it's my favorite book, although it is, because I like to recommend my favorite books. And if you're going to recommend The Power Broker to somebody, it's 1,200 pages long.
Oh my
God!
Now
and the thing of it is, there's not a wasted word, but it is 1,200 pages. You have to make a commitment. It literally took me. I'm a pretty fast reader. It took me about 2 months to read the whole thing, and it was great. And I've actually gone back and reread it subsequently. But it's 1,200 pages, and that's a lot, Yeah, and Robert Moses was the kind of figure you could probably justify 1,200 pages. And as famous and influential as George was, I think 350 is about right.
Yeah, 350 is pretty good. Robert Moses, who was the reason the Brooklyn Dodgers are now playing in Los Angeles.
That's right.
Too.
He was at very least he was a co-conspirator to Walter O'Malley, but he's kind of the one who bought O'Malley's plane ticket for him, basically.
Yeah, no question about it. I want to, and again, we're talking to Mike Vaccaro. I appreciate the time. I know you got to run a little bit, but
it's all good.
The Joe Torre situation.
Mm-hmm.
Buck leads them after all the years, and the Yankees are in the abyss for a long time. The whole thing in the '80s, they were a good team, but never good enough. They finally make the playoffs, 1995. The whole deal after they, who knows what would have happened if you didn't have the baseball situation, the strike lockout in '94, right? '95, they finally make the playoffs. They lose that classic series to Seattle. Edgar Martinez with the hit.
Yep.
Griffey Jr. scores the game-winning run. All of that.
Sure.
Game 5, right? And they fire Buck, right? Buck gets fired.
Yep.
Get into all that, and then the hiring of Joe Torre, who had not been. He did have some good years managing the Braves. He did have a couple good years with Atlanta, right? But that whole deal and how winds up with Torre being a manager.
But it also been in big league baseball for 30 years and never once participated in a World Series, which is hard to do.
Right.
But or they never won a playoff game.
Borderline Hall of Famer as a player, Joe.
The definition of a borderline Hall of Fame player. You can go either way, and it's good that he had the managing career he did, so he's actually in the Hall of Fame. But Joe, I'll preface all this with Joe Torre by saying, one of the real interesting things about the George Steinbrenner tenure is that no one is going to deny that he was the singular figure in that franchise for years and years and years, for the good and for the bad. The interesting thing, some might say the ironic thing, is that the two most prosperous times were basically when he was in absentia, because he was suspended twice.
Right.
First time for political contribution. The second time because of Howie Spira, which is a fun chapter toward the end of the book.
Right.
He's a piece of work. It still
Dave
remains
Winfield,
such.
the whole thing.
Yeah. But so like the first time he was suspended, he had brought with him as one of his original partners, Gabe Paul, longtime baseball man. And basically, Paul got to build the Yankees without George's interference the first time. So he went out and got Chris Chambliss. He got Dick Tidrow. He got Bobby Bonds, who then later on he was able to flip for Mickey Rivers. and for Ed Figueroa. He got Willie Randolph. He built the bones of that team. And, that's the team that won the World Series. So that was his first great team before Gabe finally got tired and went back to Cleveland. And similarly, the second time he got suspended, he was smart enough to get another guy from Ohio, Stick Michael.
Yep.
Look, I mean, even now, long after poor Stick has passed and George has passed, there's nobody who knows what went on there who doesn't realize just how impactful Stick's time there was, because he let these kids develop. The core four plus Bernie Williams. Poor Bernie's always now a plus now. Sadly, there's not a fun rhyme for five, because there was those five players. And I'm pretty sure that it's not going out on a limb too much to say that if George had been actively involved in the team in those years, at least one of those players, maybe two, would have been traded, by the trading deadline for Frank Viola, or for, or for an aging Brett Saberhagen, the equivalent of Steve Trout from back in the day, the crazy trades that lost him.
Two guys that wound up on my team.
I actually meant after. Yeah, they both a quality mess. I meant after later on. Right. So he, and if any of those guys are missing, I still think the Yankees probably win one or two. I don't think they win 4 out of 5. And so I think that he safeguarded his assets. Stick did. And it's interesting, when George finally did come back, it was almost like muscle memory was still there, right? Because as you mentioned, 95, they have this great series with the Mariners. I mean, I've never seen a locker room that looked like the high school football locker room when they lose the state championship, where everybody's just hugging and crying and weeping like it's the end of the world. You don't see a lot of pro locker rooms like that. The only ones I've ever seen were 95 with the Yankees and the Red Sox in 2003, the Aaron Boone game. Pros usually just, it drives fans crazy that the fans don't care as much that they don't care as much as the fans do. But that was a distraught locker room. And what's the first thing he does? He actually fires Stick Michael. He wants to give Stick a pay cut. And Stick says, yeah, stick it in your ear. I'm going to go play golf, but be your consigliere, which actually turned out to be a more valuable role in a lot of ways. And, he basically fired all the Bucks coaches, wanted to fire all the Bucks coaches. And Buck said, if you're going to do that, then you're firing me. And without actually firing him, he really kind of fired him. And then, he turned to Arthur Richmond, who had worked with Joe Torre with the Mets for many years. Arthur was the traveling secretary, a real baseball gadfly for many years. And, he spoke very highly of Torre. They hired him. There was a famous back page headline written by Anthony Reber. The column was written by my buddy Ian O'Connor, Clueless Joe, which, look, I mean, it's a clever and it makes one connotation. I mean, the clueless part was about how Torre had no idea what he was getting into. He was there on the opening day saying, I can get along with George, I can get along with anybody. And he was like, we'll see what happens, your first 4-game losing streak. And the thing is, not only was Joe a great manager, but he actually was the perfect manager to ever deal with George, because he diffused everything for the entirety of his time there. Until the very end, literally the very end. And, I think what he learned by what happened, and obviously it helps that they won every year. So you're not going to be, your finger's not going to be too itchy to pull the trigger if you're winning every year. But he also did see that, maybe some of that is because we do have something that we can rely on every year. We have a manager who's stable. We have a GM ultimately after he chased off Bob Watson, before Bob Watson sent him to the hospital a couple of times before, Brian Cashman, it's funny. I'd forgotten about this, but this is a true story about Cashman. So here's Cashman. He's 30 years old. He's given the break of a lifetime. You want to be the general manager of the Yankees. He said, well, yeah, sure. He was loyal to Stick and he was loyal to Bob Watson. But, if those guys can have the job, sure, I'll take the job. And so George offered him a 5-year deal. And he said, nope, I want a 1-year deal. He's like, what? He's like, I want 1 year. I want people to know that I don't want this job wasn't gifted to me. I want to prove that I can do it. It happened to be that first year was the '98 Yankees. So, if you're gonna bet on yourself, it's not a bad idea to do it before a 125 win season.
Yeah, right.
But and look, I mean, by the end, and I think the thing that people laugh about now is that Cashman's kind of the extra Steinbrenner child now. He's such a part of the family. But look, I mean, that's what George got toward the end of his time. Obviously, he was a little bit, he had a couple of comments about George in 07, which helped, I think, grease the path out when they replaced him with Girardi. But you know what? If you would have told any of us in 1984 or 1989 or any time that George would actually have a manager that was in place for 12 seasons, we'd say, well, he must have been in a coma for 11 of them, right? But he wasn't. And the result was they have a couple extra pennants on the wall and a couple extra commissioner's trophy in the trophy case.
Yeah, yeah, no question about it. That was unbelievable. You go back to that, and it's kind of apart from the book here. You go back to Bernie Williams. Bernie Williams, for some reason, to me, you talk about the core four and all that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to me, when I think of the great Yankee teams, right? 90, from 96, 98, 99, 2000,
Yep.
all of that. To me, Jeter's the first guy I think about. Even before Mariano, Jeter's the first guy, and then it's Bernie Williams,
who was a great player.
Bernie
Great
Williams
player.
How is Bernie Williams? I mean, there's so many Yankees. Even as a Met fan, I mean, I could I could go on. Thurman Munson, Ron Guidry, David Cohn. How is Bernie Williams not in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, I'm not sure why he never got traction. I know that, and I'm not just speaking about myself. I think a lot of us who covered those teams voted for him on the ballot. I mean, I can't speak for everyone. I'm pretty sure he got a really strong contingent of the New York voters. I don't know. I wonder if maybe, despite he's got good numbers that anybody can see, but I also wonder if maybe he had to see him every day to appreciate. It's like, no one's going to question Jeter as a Hall of Famer, but I do think, look, I mean, I think us in New York have a different realm of appreciation for what he did, because we saw him do crazy things in games against the Rangers in May, and not just against the Red Sox in October. That made you realize it was a Hall of Famer.
I just point this out? I can't stand Jeter. Just want to point that out.
No, I mean, as a player or as a person? Because as a player, it's hard. It's hard.
Chipper Jones being the all-time Met killer. You know what the all-time Met killer is?
Yeah, well, yeah, game 4, right? Yeah, sure.
Derek Jeter.
Yeah.
But what did he hit against the Mets? And like 9,000.
I think it was 914. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah,
Come on.
He
no love
enjoyed
for Jeter at all.
He enjoyed that, but yeah. No, you're right. I mean, of course, it was Jeter was going to hit the pitch in the first ball of Bobby Jones, right?
Oh,
in Game 4 of the World Series. Again, that's the other podcast we're going to do, Joe. When I do my Mets book, it's going to be like a 6-part podcast too, 3 hours each.
So if you're doing a Mets book, you better have me. You better have a chapter with Benigno.
Oh God, you kidding? Forget. So it's like when Hal Steinbrenner makes a case for his father, and he won't campaign for his father in the Hall of Fame, but obviously he believes he belongs there. The quote he gave me, and what he believes is, you can't write the history of baseball without including a couple of chapters of George Steinbrenner, which is a compelling argument. You can't write the history of the Mets without at least one chapter on Joe Benigno. So I get this. It's the same theory.
I appreciate it, and a chapter about how the Mets have peed on the great players in their franchise history. Of course, the latest being Pete Alonso and Edwin.
I may just turn the typewriter over to you for that chapter, Joe.
I could go. Please. People don't know. Okay, and these Met fans today. Okay, and I know this is a departure, but I got to say this: these Met fans today who had no problem with let Pete Alonso walk. Okay, have no idea what it was like when Tom Seaver was traded.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
I mean, you just don't. How did this happen? I mean, I was
10. I thought the world was ending that day.
Right. Yeah. Well, I was a little older than that.
I know.
I'm a faded.
I get it. But still, I mean, you try to explain to a 10-year-old like my father had to why Tom Seaver was on the Mets anymore.
Right.
But these Met fans today,
they weren't alive for that. They don't get it. You don't understand. I mean, you don't know what what they did to what Frank Cashin did to the '86 championship team.
Yep.
You don't understand what that was like. So I have to throw that in there because I know we got off on a little.
It's all good. It's all good.
And if I ever write a book, people have asked me about writing a book, and I'm not a book writer. You'd have to throw some serious money at me to actually have to work like that, because I give you guys credit that you write books, because that's work, man. And God bless you.
Well, you asked earlier why he was so compelling to me. It's because, I knew it was going to be a lot of time out of my life that was going to be devoted to George Steinbrenner. And I remember when my buddy Ian said, "Do you think I should write a book about Bill Belichick?" And my advice to him, and he's repeated it elsewhere, I said, just make sure you're okay with living with Bill Belichick every day for a couple of years. That's what you're signing up for. When you wind up writing a great book. And that's kind of what I came to terms with. And I think it would be different if I was writing a biography of George. But writing about those lives and times, I mean, I couldn't get enough of it. I mean, I would have done it for free. I didn't, but I would have. Yeah. I interrupted your train of thought about your book.
No, but that's cool. That's cool. By the way, just you bring Belichick up. I watched it again last week. Again, the 30 for 30, the 2 Bills. I'm sure you've seen that. Oh my God.
I have. When they basically turn their nose up at the Jets and just blow their noses, that's something else, huh?
Yeah, but you know what? And it's so true. I mean, when Parcells takes over the Jets, it's a circus. That whole thing was a circus. And when
Yep.
he leaves, when Parcells leaves and Belichick leaves, it's a circus. And that's what
Right.
this franchise has always been. So I don't want
Always.
to. I don't want to go over. I don't want to get crazy with them. You know what I
It's
mean?
all good. It's all
You know.
good. I'm
But
probably
that
not ever
30
gonna.
for
I'm probably
30.
not gonna write a Jets book ever, Joe. So I'll let that one. I'll leave you. I'll leave that fertile ground for you.
Right. Well, you can write the book. I'll be dead, but you can write the book when they finally win a Super Bowl, Mike.
Okay.
I know
All
I
right.
won't be here for that. You know, I won't. Like Martin
But
Luther
you'll
King, the
know.
great Martin Luther King
But
said the
you'll.
night before he died, I won't get. I'm
I
not
may
going to
not
get
get
there
there with
with
you.
you. Oh, the pain.
That's
You
great.
know, it's great stuff.
uh,
One last thing before we go.
sure.
It really is amazing the difference between George and Hal Steinbrenner. I mean, it's.
It
I
is.
mean, now the Yankees are just like it's just all branding and making money now. Really, that's what it is.
It's kind of metaphorical. You show the cover of the book. It's kind of funny. The picture of George is probably twice, 2.5 times as big as the picture of Hal, and that wasn't an accident. Obviously, I mean, most of the book is about George. I think if you wrote a book about Hal, I mean, I think Hal would admit that, man, you better have some imagination to write a book about me. So I think there's 3 chapters about Hal, and there's 25 or 26 about
Right.
George. That's probably right. Look, I mean, for one thing, I mean, the most of the interesting stuff happened under George's watch. And look, I mean, you're right. I mean, look, it's not the first time that a father and a son have been completely different, right? I mean, my father was one of these guys who could fix everything, do everything. I have a ring light here. I'd have my wife turn it on for me.
Right.
So I didn't inherit anything from my father except my love of sports. So it's not surprising that Hal is clearly, from a personality standpoint, not George. And in fact, George said late in his life that he was glad that he didn't want Hal to believe he had to measure up to him in terms of his persona or his flamboyance. And look, he trusted Hal from when Hal was 12 years old. 12 years old, Hal went to his father and told him there's this, Burger King was doing a promotion with all these like Yankee cards. You get a Whopper and you get a couple of Yankees cards. And he told him, Lou Piniello's not in this card series. And of course, Piniello was George's favorite player, one of his closest friends. And so Steinbrenner made Burger King add 5,000 Pinella cards to that series. And those are actually collector's items now, and Hal still has one. In fact, he showed it to me.
Interesting.
But that was the first time that his father said, this kid might have something. And even the entirety of Hal's existence has been diametrically opposite from George. As he said to me in the book, he said, my father was about the back page. I'm more about going to the back room and getting deals done, and and dealing with people away from the spotlight. Sometimes I think to a fault and to his detriment. I mean, I think maybe he might want to be a little more out front because people, they care a lot about his team and they want to hear what he thinks about the team. That's why it's like, I don't know, Joe, you and I think have had this argument before. When people say that owners don't care, I mean, I get it that you have bad owners. Obviously there was a lot of years people thought that about the Wilpons. People thought about Jim Dolan. People still, think about that and many other things about Woody Johnson now. But people start talking in recent years that John Mara just doesn't care, and I'm like, you should sit with John Mara during a Giants game like I have. You'll never see a fan, the craziest fan ever, will ever be the equal of John Mara. He cares, and Hal cares. Hal burns to win, and it's not just that he says he burns to win. I believe him because he knows he knows every aspect of what he's doing. And he looks at it as a not as a burden, but as a privilege to be the owner of the Yankees and to carry on the standard of what his father did. But he also deals with certain realities that his father never did. I'll tell the story, probably 100,000 times during the course of the next couple of weeks. But to me, it's the most compelling difference. And the '77 team, right, the best team money could buy, that was what it was called. It cost $3 million the whole payroll. And sure, that's a funny number, but even if you convert it to $2026, that's like $16 million, which is what Aaron Judge will make by July 1st. And when George would talk to his partners back in the day, and they'd gripe at him because he didn't have a dividend for a couple of years, he'd laugh and he'd say, "Well, that's the cost of your season tickets. Enjoy the view." And they'd all laugh and have 3 martini lunch and move on.
Right.
Hal's having very different conversations with his partners when he's talking about the possibility of paying a baseball player $750 million. As we said before, George didn't have to deal with Steve Cohen in his backyard. He didn't have to deal with whatever you want to call the Dodgers or the Blue Jays. And their corporate monoliths that he has to deal with. Now, that said, I think George's superpower skill set was figuring out a way to compete against them anyway. And I do think that if we had 54-year-old George Steinbrenner running the team now, Aaron Boone certainly wouldn't be the manager now, and Barry Cashman certainly would be the manager now.
No, he would have been gone.
Maybe Boone would have been on his second or third tenure by now because he might have brought him back and kept recycling them because that's what George would do. But there's no question that the impetuous. But I'm not. I think the question that people are going to ask when they read this book is that better for the team? I don't know that. The Yankees went through a lot of emptiness in the '80s. They won more games than anybody in the '80s, but they didn't win a championship. And George was responsible for a lot of that because of his impetuousness. There was always two Georges. There was a George who was always out front about wanting to reinvest in his team and be out in front with scouting and all that stuff. But he was also equally measured by the George who was a lunatic fan who overruled him, and got rid of Fred McGriff and Willie McGee and Doug Playback. And so you ask yourself, would you rather have that? Because look, the other reason why this book was so much fun to do is that I know generations of Yankee fans now don't remember George as anything other than this kindly avuncular figure. They don't remember the George that you and I grew up on. The one who was always on the back page and had a lot of funny stories, a lot of troubling stories, a lot of good, a lot of bad. That's why he's so compelling to me as a subject for a book.
Great book, great guy. You're the best. I love you, Mike. I know you got to run, and we have had you for a long time here.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Joe. Thank you for all the time.
I can't wait for that Met book, Mike. I want to get that Met book out. Let's go. I got a lot to talk about. At least give me. You don't have to give me a chapter, but at least give me some credits on the Met and any material you need. I'm here.
You'll be in the index for sure. Probably C also. You're wearing your Johnny's colors too. I like that, Joe.
I am wearing them. Let's go, John. I'm very excited. Like I told you, I want to see Patino with the white suit on in Indianapolis for the Final Four, bro.
From your lips to God's ears, maybe God's listening to the Vincennes this week.
Right, exactly. Mike, God bless, bro. It's great talking to you.
Always, Joe. Thank you.
Talk soon. All right, man?
Absolutely. Please. Anytime.
Be good. The great Mike Vaccaro. All right. We'll talk to you again. To everybody, again, Mike Vaccaro, check out the book, The Bosses of the Bronx. Here it is again. I'm telling you, I recommend it. Nobody does it better than Vaccaro. Everybody have a great week. God bless America. All the love. And we'll talk to you on Friday. Take care, Mike.
Take care, Joe.
See you, baby.